no way we can solve this with a complicated solution. We need a very, very simplistic solution. So we went in and designed 4 types of facilities, and we basically broke it into two big bins. Places to put COVID patients and places to put non-COVID patients. We looked through the entire array of different facilities out there, and we came actually into compartmentalized rooms, which I would call dormitories and hotels, and then large open spaces, which primarily go to field houses and convention centers. I'm going to kind of walk you through how those 4 options, COVID, non-COVID, hotel, convention center, how we do that. We designed a standard design. Working with HHS and the FEMA, the entire federal government, the vice president gave us guidance on how would we continue to be able to put together a federal solution so then we could offer it up to states and cities to be able to then site adapt to standard design. The challenge we did this is a state decision as to how they want to treat these patients. What we're seeing is some governors are making a decision is to take the people that are non-COVID, normally low acute, that are in hospitals, and take them out of the hospitals and make room for the COVID patients in the hospital. We're seeing other states that are doing exactly the opposite. They're taking all the COVID patients and putting them in a particular facility. Just a couple other quick dynamics. When you have the compartmentalized rooms, the hotel and the dormitory, it's harder to staff it because you don't have such an open area where 1 or 2 nurses can see 20 people at once. There's still ways we can work our way through that. But what we're seeing in the last week is most of the cities and the states want to go to a wider area where they can have more people in a population. I will say probably 30 or 40 in kind of a node that then they can control that as we work through the nurses' stations. So then what happens is we went to, first of all, we went to Governor Cuomo a week from Monday, and he said, what can I do to be able to help get you started? The president told us, be aggressive, make something happen. Dr. Esper, my boss, the Secretary of Defense, said, get ahead of it. Anticipate where the problems are. So that day when we were talking to Governor Cuomo, we said right up front, we need 1 building by the end of the day. We probably need 3 buildings by tomorrow night. We need 7 or 8 buildings by this weekend. And then all of a sudden, and I'll just use New York as an example, we were turned on within about 24 hours by FEMA to go into the Javits Center. I'm going to use an example today talking about the Javits Center, how as the entire federal team came together to be able to do that. But at the same time, our Corps of Engineers are working side by side, and I want to always make sure you know this is a team. This is the FEMA rep, the HHS rep, the Corps of Engineer rep, all 3 people standing by side with their shirts on, out talking to the city mayors, talking to the state officials to be able to say what works best for Illinois, what works best for California. I've got 9 general officer divisions. They have been in 51 governor's offices in the last 7 days. We've talked to the rest of them on the phone. We want to be able to tailor a solution that works best for a given city or a given state. So let's get into a little bit of the details, and I'll stop and ask some questions. So what we're finding, Javits Center is probably the best example. What is nice about using a permanent facility is that you have all the infrastructure there. Somebody once said, you know, let's go build a hospital in the middle of a parking lot. You can't do that in 2 or 3 weeks, and we don't have any more time than 2 or 3 weeks. So we're going into these facilities that already have electricity, they already have water, they have all the fire protection, they have all of the driveways all put in, they have all the capability they need to. Javits Center is an amazing facility. The people that work in the Javits Center are amazing people. They've got many partitions. So we went in there and working with the city, kind of laid out where would the different, we call them pods, where would the different patients' pods be, where would the nurses' stations be, and then how would we array all that out. At the same time, FEMA offered up through HHS 4 250-person hospitals. So those came in big boxes. Yesterday, the New York National Guard was opening up cardboard boxes, and they're putting beds in every one of these. This is a 10 by 10-foot area. It's got hard partitions around 3 of the walls and a curtain on one of them. And they're almost all up. We basically took that 4 by 250 is 1,000. We thought we could expand it by stretching the ratio. So today, we're going to plan on having 2,910 rooms up by Monday morning in the Javits Center, working as a team. The nice thing about convention centers, you might not know this, every 10 feet there's a great big steel door on the floor. You open it up, and in there is all the electrical, there's cold water, there's hot water, and there's a place for sewage. So you can actually do things like sinks right in the middle of a convention center to be able to make that happen. So that's all there. This particular one is going to be non-COVID. So non-COVID patients that are in the New York City hospitals would come out, and they would go into the back side of the convention center. There's a receiving area. The hospital will deliver them. They'll get accepted back in. They'll go into those nodes, and then the staff comes from the other side that's coming in. And then not only do you have the FEMA hospitals, you've got the HHS doctors, and then Dr. Esper, the Secretary of Defense, sent up 2 Army field hospitals to be able to augment the staff so the whole team's working side by side. Now, there's 3 other hospitals we're doing in New York, which are going to be COVID. They're off the place, and I could talk about that, but they're out more in the communities. And then the city has got a lot of hospitals. Governor Cuomo, I talked to him a couple days ago. I was in Governor de Blasio's office last night. Both of the senior leaders are very, very aggressive of trying to handle this facility deficit. I'm going to talk to you about Chicago in a little bit, and if you have a question, because Chicago's got a completely different scenario. But where last week we kind of talked about the hotel and dormitory, we are doing those, but what we're finding, we can probably get a little bit more bang for the buck by going into large facilities. Today, we're looking at 114 different facilities in 50 states and 5 territories. We've assessed 81 of them. We've already cut contracts, and we're cutting contracts every night to be able to get contractors to be able to come into the facilities. So I want to just continue to stress, standard design, validated by the federal government, and then passed down to states and cities to site adapt. I've got 43 colonels that work for the Corps of Engineers. They have the authority and the power with their unbelievably talented civilian teams to put these hospitals on the ground. So I'll stop right there and take some questions, and I can weave some other vignettes in if you want to.
Thank you, sir. Let's go ahead and begin in the room with Tom Baldwin.
Tom.
General, thanks for doing this. You said you were told to anticipate where the problems are. That you said 115 different facilities in 50 states. You talked a little bit about New York and Javits. Talk about the other hotspots, Washington State, I guess San Francisco, LA. What do you expect there? How long is it going to take? How many facilities?
The best thing I could do is, again, just like as Vice President Pence said, take lead from the task force so we don't have a lot of different opinions out there. I take most of my lead from CDC and what they're what are in the daily briefs out there. But we're also doing a lot of modeling. So we're looking at where we see. And here's the big thing, Tom. It's not only necessarily how many people are affected today. It's the rate of the infection. Some ones are going faster than others. So we've got to anticipate. And being an engineer, I can't work 2 or 3 days out. This is 2 weeks out. Where do we think we're going to have that challenge? So we're taking 2 variables, the slope of the line of the growth of the curve, and we're also taking the bed shortage and how much bed shortage do we want to have. And when you put those together, we got some analytics that we do in the Corps to be able to say, here's where we think our biggest targets are. But what's most important is getting one of my colonels sitting next to a mayor or a governor saying, where do you anticipate the need? Because they know that better than anybody else.
But at this point, do you know what you're going to be doing in Seattle, let's say, San Francisco, LA?
I've got 114 spots. I know exactly what we're going to be doing. And they are in a lot of the big areas. We're focused on Washington, California.
Can you give us detail on Washington? What do you have?
I'll run you through a couple details here.
LA and San Francisco, if you got.
And I don't want to get deep into all of them because, again, some of these my guys are doing. New York, I mean, the bottom line, I told you, 2,900 non-COVID really in the Javits Center. And then, again, we see more and more facilities coming on board next week. California, I think right now in Sacramento, we're looking around 360. Some of those are COVID, some of those are non-COVID. That's just in what's called the Sleep Train Arena out in California where we've been asked to look. And, again, we're mainly doing this almost city by city. As much as the governor makes a list, my guys are calling back saying, here's what this one city talks about. Seattle, we're working very closely with the leadership of the state of Washington. DOD did send a couple of those field hospitals to Seattle, so we're continuing to work the numbers there. It's premature to say exactly what the site is or exactly what the numbers. And then I think the one that really has popped here in the last 24 hours is the one in Chicago. So let me just kind of tell you about Chicago, because this is really out of the box. I did an interview this morning and somebody asked me, do you have a battle drill for how you've done this? We've never done a pandemic capability. We don't have on-the-shelf designs of how to modify hotels into, COVID centers. So we went into the McCormick Convention Center, and I told you, the ability to do negative pressure in a hotel room is pretty easy. But when you go into a gigantic, voluminous room like a convention center to try to bring the pressure down, we didn't think it was attainable. What we're doing in McCormick is we got turned on by FEMA to do a $75 million build. So we're in there now. Hall C, Tom, is basically 2 of the FMS. These are the FEMA the FEMA hospitals. 250 people each, a total of 500 people. They're going in, they're relatively what's called low acute, not a lot of injuries, okay? And this entire convention center is all COVID in a convention center.
So 500 all COVID?
In Hall C.
Right.
Okay? Now, what we're going to do in Hall A, we're going to go in and we're going to put 1,800 in Hall A. And that's also COVID, but that's going to be a little higher on the complexity of their injuries. And I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to try to articulate that. Hall C is low. Hall A is a little bit higher. Hall B is the hardest one. Those are 750. They need self-contained units. So what we're doing is in Hall C and A, we're bringing the pressure down in the entire convention center. It's going to be lower pressure. Keeps all the containment in. But in Hall B, what they've asked us to do is to actually go get some type of a module that we can set inside there. So we're right in the middle of discussions right now with contractors. Do we buy something like what's called the 40-foot mill van, a isolated container, or do we do it with a tent? And our guys are trying to figure that out now. Now, is it 1 person? Is it 6 person? We're working through that. But the total there is somewhere on the order of magnitude, I think about 3,000 that are going to go into the Chicago Convention Center, this McCormick Convention Center, and we want to write those contracts and get that in. Our goal is to have that one done somewhere around the 24th of April. And this is the main message that you need to know.
And all COVID.
All COVID. Right. I did not think we could meet the COVID standard in a massive big building, but my engineers are telling me we think we've got the capability to do that. The main thing is, I go to people and I'll tell you, a lot of times everybody says, here's the standard I have to have. You've got to get to here. And we calculate and we say, that's 6 weeks out. You can't do that. I tell our guys, you have 3 weeks. You get as much as you can done in 3 weeks, and then mission's complete. Because we have a very, very narrow window of opportunity. And if we don't leverage that opportunity, we're going to miss it.
Hey, quickly, the Defense Secretary said 2 weeks ago, 5 million masks would be sent out, 2,000 ventilators. We've been reaching out to FEMA repeatedly to find out where those mass ventilators have gone.
So Tom, I'm a good soldier. I stay in my lane, okay? There are 3 parts of this stool to be able to help make it. We need to find the sites. That's the first S. We need to find the supplies. That's the second S. And we need to find the staff. That's the third S. I'm the first S. So all the other 2, there's a lot of other people in the federal government that can answer those questions. I have got enough to do worrying about sites. So when it comes to masks and ventilators, I'd say find another person to ask, and they will give you much, much more detail than me. And I don't want us to be negative, but I'm just saying I'm worried about getting hospital beds built.
Stay in the room. We'll go to Tara.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thanks, General, for doing this. Can you talk about how you're going to fit the Seattle Seahawks Stadium? Is it going to be kind of along the same lines as Chicago? And then can you provide a little bit more detail on how you're going to do both COVID and non-COVID in Sacramento? Will that be at one location, or is those different locations? And then last question for you. Last week when you talked to us and we asked for maybe a ballpark of how many hospital beds you thought you would have to create, and I think you offered about 10,000 or even possibly more than that. As we have seen cases rise, has that number gone up? Do you think you're actually going to be building more than that?
So I'll try to take those in order. There are still negotiations happening in Seattle right now, so I don't know the exact specifics. I know that my team on the ground is working very closely with the FEMA leaders, the HHS leaders. Exactly is it in the stadium? There's also an event center there, so it's probably premature to tell you exactly what it is. When I go there and I look at it, I'll come back and brief you, just like I'm doing on Chicago or Javits. But I know that it's a significant investment that we're going to make in that area, and I just don't know exactly where the stadium is. It's certainly not going to be out. If it ever was in the stadium, it wouldn't be on the field. It would be in supporting facilities. So we'll work through that. The one in California, the Sacramento one, what my guys are telling me is it is going to be COVID in one portion and non-COVID in the other. These convention centers actually have big walls, like big foldable walls. In some portions, they're actually concrete walls right in between them with big sealed doors. So I do think there's an ability. We have a lot of capability with this isolation doors and baffle chambers and all the rest that we could take a big convention center and I think on one half have it COVID and on the other one have it non-COVID. Now that's where we got to be careful, and that's where we as engineers have to lean on the medical community to say, boy, if you start having people going back and forth, how do you work that? It brings up an interesting point, and I'll bring it back to the Chicago piece, because when you have all COVID people in one room, then you say, how do you to protect the staff that's in there? They have made a decision that in that facility, everybody that goes in there that is going to be staff will be 100% PPE. So you will all suit up, and you'll go in there and you will be protected as an individual, but everybody else in the facility would not, they'd all be in the open area. If you go into Javits, because it's non-COVID, then there's really no risk to the staff that's walking around. And I think the last thing, we don't really know the numbers. What we're doing, and everybody would want to say, give me a big number. I can't work that way. I'm an engineer. I like to work in very, very detail. So here's a city that's got 3,000 here. Here's 10,000. Here's 15,000. I've got my list of 141. I know you want to see them all, but I can't show it to you. And every one of those says maybe 10,000, maybe 5,000. So in time, and I want to continue to reiterate, the Corps of Engineers in this particular mission is working for FEMA. These requests go through the state. Administrator Gaynor's the decision maker, so he's got to figure out where do we see the threat. And if the threat is distributed in some other place than where most of the requests come from, just in apportionment, he's got to be able to make sure the federal government applies the resources in a balanced approach, and that's where basically he signs a tasking order to me, and then the Corps of Engineers builds where we need to build.
And I noticed a shift from last week. It seemed like you were really focused on hotel rooms or dorm rooms, and now it's large facilities. Was there a hesitancy to use the hotels? Like, could you clean them up afterwards to still be used as a hotel after this is over? Is that the reason for the shift?
No, I think that it was more that the cities felt that the amount of requirement was going to be so big that just the amount of hotels was going to be just a lot of work. By the time you sign a lease and put us in there, hotel rooms, I'll be honest with you, are probably a little more accommodating. But on the other hand, when you, like the Javits Center, I was in there yesterday, and it is a big, big area, but I was on the second floor, and you can do an awful lot very, very fast. So from an efficiency perspective, and as much as we want to be accommodating, I continue to stress to you, and I'll do that every time I brief, it's got to be the good enough solution. And Javits is the good enough solution.
Sir, let's go to the phone.
Of
David
course.
Martin with CBS.
General, a short time ago, General Hyten spoke with reporters on the record, and in addition to Chicago, he mentioned that the next areas of greatest concern as Michigan, Florida, and Louisiana. So I'd like to ask you to give us some specifics about what you're doing in those three states.
We're continue to be concerned about all those. I talked to Governor Edwards 2 days ago personally on what we see down there. We are looking at options for him. It's premature to say what facilities, but you're very aware in Louisiana we do have some relatively large facilities that we can use, and my engineers are doing plans for him today to try to give him some options. When we look at Florida, you have a more aging community there. I know that the state continues to look at challenges in Miami, Orlando, and Tampa. Right now, I think we're still developing options, and it's probably premature, but we're very aware that because of the a little bit more senior community, that could be an unbelievable high demand. And then I've got a colonel today who's actually in Michigan working with the leadership of Michigan. I don't think I have any exact leads on facilities there, but as this continues to work out and I get smarter on our 141 sites, I'll be able to give you more. Right now, again, because it's decentralized, the worst thing I can do is be calling down to 43 colonels at 1 o'clock saying I got a press conference at 3, take the time to figure out what I should say. I'd rather say, go sign a lease, go build a hospital, and then we'll figure it out. And if I got to tell you guys I'll get back to you 2 or 3 days, I think you'll understand.
Let's staying with the phone. Let's go to Courtney Cubey with NBC.
you're now saying 141, and earlier you had said 114. Which is it?
Sorry, it is 114. 114 facilities, sites that we're looking at. One of the sites, I think, actually has 3 or 4 buildings, so it's a little bit different, but that's my fault. 114 facilities, 81 of those assessments, these are assessments, are complete. We continue to do probably 15 or 20 a day. I would think that the 114 is going to keep going up by 20 or 30 every single day.
Courtney, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Okay, so I want to ask just a couple of clarifications on specifically the Chicago and the McCormick Place Convention Center. So that the $75 million bill, that's for the entire thing, right? Halls A, B, and C?
I believe so, Courtney. That's what my guys briefed me.
Okay, great. And then I just wanted to be clear because you said it before the first hall, and I wanted to make sure it was the entire project. I know you don't want to go through a whole comprehensive list of the 114 facilities or the 81 that have been assessed, but is it possible? Could your team give us a list of sort of the facilities that have been assessed, or even if it's not the individual facilities, but the locations, just so we can get a sense of where some of the places that you might be starting to branch out and look? Is that possible?
And I think in fairness, what I would tell you is that I will probably go back to the people I work for, is FEMA, and let them continue to be able to have the option of doing that. If they have no problem with me showing this, then I certainly want to be supportive to your needs. On the other hand, I don't want to get ahead of FEMA because they might feel that there's some area that's got 5 sites and they don't want to raise expectations. So I would say, Courtney, let me work that offline, and next time I talk to you, I'll tell you what the answer to that question is, okay?
Thanks, Courtney. Let's go to back of the room. Barbara, CNN.
You talked at the beginning a little bit about this window that you see. You described it as like things have to get done in 3 weeks-ish. Tell me what that window is. Is it that you see the rate of infection peaking in 3 weeks, continuing to get worse in 3? What is that 3-week window to you about vis-a-vis COVID?
Yeah, so I think, and again, the window is different for every single city. So last night I was with the Commissioner of Health in the mayor's office in New York City, and she gave us what she felt was the window. And a very, very firm date. I need X amount of hospital beds by this date. So we're working toward her suspense in New York City. Now, I know that in other cities, I just got off the phone with another one of my commanders. He's got 7 more days till that he meets that window. And I would tell you that when the ambulances come streaming down the street and they pull into the back of the hospital, whatever that facility, and you're taking somebody out that needs to go in a hospital bed, we don't want the facility to be the critical path. And as I'll go back to Tom's question, we know that staff is an issue, ventilators are an issue, I got it. But right now, when those people come out, we want to be able to make sure they have an adequate facility. Now, don't forget, everything that I am doing with the Corps of Engineers and FEMA is assuming that all other possible stretches have been done. You ever been in a hospital room where there's 1 bed, but you look on the other side of the wall and there's 2 or 3 other plugs where they could put 3 other beds? A lot of these hospitals have a massive, expansive capability. They're doing that right now. The city of New York is doing an awful lot to go out and actually get hotels on their own to do some of these kind of things. So this is when everybody is at max capacity, then we're trying to come in to be able to make sure we build that augmentation capacity to take the stress off. So therefore, if they need the room in the real hospital, the bed's available because we've got the backup one to where the person was to place in there. So it's a different answer for every city.
But it is the point at which existing hospital capacity is at a critical stage.
That's how we're looking at it.
And we'll stay in the room here. Megan?
So up until about this week, Secretary Esper was kind of urging more that cities and states should look to their local contractors to be able to do this on their own because the Army Corps of Engineers would take some time to turn all of it around. But it seems like you guys have gotten up and running in just a few days. So how are you able to expedite your process to do this as quickly as anybody else was able to do it?
So first of all, two things. The first thing is to be able to have an idea and to excite a passion versus to be able to have a design. We've got to tell everybody, you got to go all in. I was telling somebody the other day, the federal government has said maybe the best way to beat this is stay home. I told a bunch of people today, I said the best way to do this is stay home and be on the phone. If you have a hotel, call up your mayor or call up your governor. If you're a professor in a dormitory and you've got 5,000 empty rooms that we don't know about, call up your state and let them know. So let people know that there are facilities out there so we can work this out. So it's the ability to leverage the idea. It's much more of an idea than it is a final design. And then let this grow bottoms up. And that's what we're really seeing is taking off. We actually had Britain call us 3 days ago asking us to export our idea over to Britain so they can leverage it over there. We're working with Australia right now to be able to coach them through how to do this in Australia. So we're really working at it, just like Dr. Esper said, we need cities and states to do it, but President Trump has said right up front, the federal government has to step in here as well. We've got to be able to continue to push, and that's where I tell our guys, don't wait for the phone to ring. We're looking at the red dot. And if we haven't got a phone call, we're calling up our colonel, say, you go down to that city. I just did one 2 hours ago, Tom. I said, this dot is too big. And yet I don't see an assessment. I don't see, it's not on my 114 cities. Get our guy down there and go find the mayor and say, what are you doing? And some of these mayors have a great plan, maybe, that they've got some other capability. We had one city where there's 3 hospitals that are being built right now. Then they're coming on board in another couple of weeks. That mayor knows that. We don't know that. So we're seeing a demand signal, but we don't necessarily know what the requirement is. So it's the ability to be able to be aggressive, get ahead of the requirement, anticipate it before we need it, but also work side by side. So it's the federals pulling hard, the state pulling hard, and the cities pulling hard. Everybody working together. When I walked into Javits, I don't think I said this, I walked into Javits last night, and there's 20 people there. And they didn't hear because there was some general coming, and I walked in, and all of a sudden, here's the colonels from the Army Hospital, and here's the HHS team, all there with their HHS shirts, and DHS, and everybody was around the table trying to figure out how can we stretch some more beds into Javits. It's an amazing, and this is where a lot of the challenges go away when you all have a common vision to try to make solving a problem altogether. So that is a good question, Megan, but you got to be aggressive here.
Well, we'll do one more on the phone. Let's go to Jared with
and we can take
News.
him too, because we'll try to get him as well. Okay, good.
Go ahead, Jared.
Yeah, thanks, General. I'm just curious, considering all the infrastructure advantages you talked about with convention centers, to what extent are you making formal recommendations to states and cities that that's their best option, or is it just completely dependent on local conditions?
I've got to admit, I'm not real smart on the infrastructure in a convention center, but I went through with the Javits team yesterday. They walked me through their infrastructure, and I was amazed at the flexibility. These people do 171 events a year, from car shows to boat shows. They have down in their basement all kinds of wall panels. They can make almost any kind of configurations. And so as I think through more and more on this, the convention center model is a pretty good model. The nice thing is I don't have to bring all this stuff in with other contractors. They have the majority of it. They have a massive workforce in the Javits Convention Center that's already trained. They're already there. They need their jobs as well, so we can put them back to work. So I'm leaning very heavily on the convention center. We're excited that we might have the potential to do the convention center model COVID, but it really goes back to what works best for that city, and the hotel arrangement might be better for smaller cities. If you have a bunch of 5 or 6 hotels out near a highway intersection and you don't have great big large open spaces, then we could go into that hotel capability and give you 150 or 200 and still be able to take a demand off, because it's not just the big cities. The smaller cities are going to have the same exact problem. It's just scale. The smaller cities might be able to scale up to it, but it goes back to what is that individual requirement and how do we continue to support them? Sir, over to you.
General Lucas Thompson, Fox News. There's a lot of people in L.A. that are worried that they could be the next New York. What are you doing in L.A.? What are your efforts there?
So let me get back to that one. I've got a briefing in about an hour with all of my commanders. I'll double check. I know right now that I think we definitely have people working in L.A., but I don't have the specifics with respect to which convention center. I mean, I've got reams of paper in here. I could dig it out. But I think let me do a little bit more details, and we can talk L.A. later.
And in New York, what are you looking to ramp up to? Like you mentioned the 2,900 rooms in Javits Center, but what are your plans right now? How many beds total in New York?
Yeah, so I think and I'm not going to get into specifics because I'm really only talking about the facilities we're helping. I know the mayor's got a lot of his own facilities, and I don't know all those numbers. The governor has got a lot of his own facilities that I don't know those numbers. I know that we have been asked to go out both for the city and the state to find 3 more each, 3 more big facilities, and we're right in the middle of writing contracts right now for some of those state facilities, and we're still trying to figure out if is it COVID or non-COVID for some of the city facilities. And I flew out 2 hours ago. My guys are on the ground working those out right now.
And how is the hospital ship Comfort arriving in New York Monday going to help your efforts?
And again, I'll probably stay in my lane. I don't have a lot to do with the Comfort. All I know is that when you think about the concept of taking people that are non-COVID out of hospitals, that will, and I hear the numbers about 1,000, that will end up bringing more of that workload out of those hospitals so that if I was asked to build an extra 1,000, that 1,000 could go into the Comfort, which means an extra 1,000 that we don't have to handle. I'm going to try to be on the ground about every other day, so hopefully when I come in, we'll be able to do kind of a deep dive on a specific facility. And then again, whatever we can do, either through the FEMA or HH architecture, our goal is to be transparent, but it's also to be extremely aggressive and try to be, again, I can't stretch it enough, the good enough solution on time.
And I think it'd be helpful to get a listing of those 114 facilities.
Let me get with FEMA.
We're not asking you about every city in the country, down the line.
Let me see if there's any problem, Tom, with that.
When are you planning to visit Washington State?
Right now, I think I've got every day is crazy. You can imagine that. So that's probably my next one. I think I'm doing Chicago next week, and then early next week, and I'll try to do Washington perhaps later. Okay.
Sir, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks
Ladies
a lot.
and gentlemen, thank you very much.